I was thin when I married Victor Ashford. I know that sounds like a strange way to begin, but you need to understand this if you're going to understand anything else. When I walked down the aisle at 23 years old, I weighed 118 pounds. I had a 24-inch waist. I wore a size 4 wedding dress that my mother had to have taken in because it was too loose. I was beautiful. Everyone said so.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
Victor certainly said so. Back then, he couldn't stop telling me how lucky he was, how gorgeous I looked, how he was the envy of every man in the room. He said it at our wedding. He said it on our honeymoon. He said it for the first year or two of our marriage. And then he stopped. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when the comments started. They crept in slowly, like water seeping through cracks in a foundation. A raised eyebrow when I reached for a second helping at dinner. A joke about how I was letting myself go after our first child was born. A suggestion that maybe I should skip dessert, delivered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I told myself he was just concerned about my health. I told myself he loved me and wanted what was best for me. I told myself that marriage required compromise, and if my husband wanted me to watch my weight, that wasn't such an unreasonable request. So I tried. God, how I tried. I counted calories. I joined gyms. I did Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig and Atkins and South Beach. I starved myself before vacations and binged afterward from the stress of maintaining perfection. I stood in front of mirrors and cataloged every flaw, every bulge, every inch of skin that didn't meet the standard Victor had set for me. And somehow, despite all my efforts, or perhaps because of them, I gained weight. Not all at once. A few pounds here, a few pounds there. After each pregnancy, I held on to an extra 10 pounds that I couldn't seem to lose. After each of Victor's promotions, which brought more stress and more social obligations and more dinners where I had to smile while he made comments about my appetite, I found comfort in food that I couldn't find anywhere else. By our 10th anniversary, I had gained 40 pounds. By our 20th, I had gained 80. And with each pound, Victor's disappointment grew more obvious, his comments more cutting, his affection more conditional. "You used to be so beautiful," he would say, looking at old photographs with something like grief in his eyes. What happened to you? What happened to me was him. But I didn't understand that for a long time. I want to be clear about something. I'm not blaming Victor for my weight. I'm an adult. I made choices. I put food in my mouth and I didn't exercise as much as I should have, and I let stress drive me to the refrigerator instead of to healthier coping mechanisms. But I am blaming him for creating the stress, for making me feel like I was never good enough, no matter what I did, for turning my body into a battleground where I could never win. Because here's the thing about emotional abuse. It's sneaky. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't leave bruises that other people can see. It just slowly, steadily erodes your sense of self until you don't recognize the person you've become. Victor never hit me. He never screamed or threw things or threatened physical violence. He was far too sophisticated for that. Instead, he used words, looks, silences. He perfected the art of making me feel small without ever raising his voice. "Are you really going to wear that?" he would ask before parties, his tone mild, his message devastating. "I ran into Jennifer today. She looks amazing. Has she lost weight? You should ask her what she's doing. I just want you to be healthy, Caroline. Is that so wrong?" No, it wasn't wrong. What was wrong was the way he said it. The implication that I was failing him. The constant, relentless pressure to be something I couldn't seem to become. And so I ate. I ate when I was sad. I ate when I was stressed. I ate when I was angry and had no other outlet for my rage. Food became my comfort, my companion, my secret rebellion against a husband who controlled everything else in my life. But here's what Victor never understood. While he was busy monitoring my waistline, I was busy managing our finances. It started innocently enough. Victor had no interest in the boring details of our money. He wanted to make it. He was a successful real estate developer, and he was good at the flashy parts of the job, the schmoozing and dealing and closing. But he had no patience for budgets, taxes, investments, or paperwork. "That's what I have you for," he would say, waving his hand dismissively whenever I tried to discuss our financial situation. Just handle it. So I did. I handled all of it. I paid the bills. I managed our investment accounts. I met with our accountant and our financial advisor. I read the documents that needed signing, and I understood what they meant, even when Victor just scrawled his signature without glancing at the contents. At first, I was just being a good wife, taking care of the household responsibilities so my husband could focus on his important work. But somewhere along the way, maybe around year 15, when his comments had become a daily occurrence and his affection had become a distant memory, I realized something. I was the one with the power. I just hadn't been using it. The house we lived in, the one Victor loved to show off to his colleagues and clients, the one he called his at every opportunity, it was in my name. It had been from the beginning, for tax reasons that our accountant had recommended, and Victor hadn't bothered to understand. The investment accounts that funded our lifestyle, I was the primary account holder on every single one. Victor was listed as a beneficiary, but the control was mine. The cars, the country club membership, the vacation properties, all of it was structured to flow through a trust that I had established years ago, ostensibly for estate planning purposes. Victor had signed the paperwork without reading it, trusting that I was handling the boring details as I always did. What he didn't realize was that those boring details meant everything belonged to me. Legally, irrevocably, completely. For years, I did nothing with this knowledge. I told myself I was just being prudent, protecting our family's assets. I told myself that it didn't matter whose name was on the paperwork because we were a team, partners in this together. But I knew, somewhere deep down, that I was building an escape hatch, just in case things got worse, just in case I finally found the courage to leave. The courage came on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 28 years into my marriage. I came home from grocery shopping to find a strange car in our driveway, a red convertible that screamed midlife crisis. I assumed Victor was meeting with a client, though it seemed odd for a business meeting at our house. I walked through the front door with my arms full of grocery bags, already planning what to make for dinner. I walked into the kitchen and set the bags on the counter. And then I walked into the living room and found my husband with his tongue down the throat of a woman young enough to be our daughter. They didn't notice me at first. They were too wrapped up in each other, too lost in whatever fantasy they were playing out on my couch, in my house, in the middle of my life. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I watched my husband's hands on another woman's body. I watched him kiss her with a passion he hadn't shown me in years. I watched my marriage end in real time, and I felt nothing. That was the strangest part. I expected devastation. I expected rage or heartbreak or at least surprise. But standing there, watching Victor betray me in the most cliched way possible, I felt nothing but a strange, distant relief. It was finally over. The waiting, the wondering, the hoping things might somehow get better. It was all over. I had my answer. I had my reason. I had my way out. Victor noticed me then. He pulled back from the woman, Brittany, I would later learn, his 26-year-old assistant, and had the audacity to look annoyed rather than ashamed. Caroline. He said my name like an accusation. You're home early. I finished shopping. My voice was calm, eerily calm, even to my own ears. I didn't realize we had company. Brittany had the grace to look embarrassed, at least. She smoothed her hair, adjusted her blouse, avoided my eyes. She was beautiful, of course, thin and blonde and everything I wasn't. Everything Victor had spent 28 years wishing I could be. This isn't what it looks like, Victor said, which was such an absurd lie that I almost laughed. It looks like you're having an affair. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. Instead, he stood up, straightened his shirt, and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Cold, calculating, utterly without remorse. Fine, he said. You want the truth? Here's the truth. I'm done, Caroline. I'm done pretending to be happy. I'm done with this marriage. And I'm done with you. Victor, Brittany started, but he cut her off with a wave of his hand. Pack your bags, he said to me. I need a woman who fits into designer clothes, not a whale. Brittany's moving in. You can stay at a hotel until we sort out the divorce. I should have cried. I should have screamed. I should have thrown something or collapsed or begged him to reconsider. Instead, I smiled. Okay, I said. Victor blinked. Whatever reaction he'd expected, that wasn't it. Okay? Okay. I picked up my purse from where I'd dropped it by the door. I'll go. Just like that? No fight? No tears? He seemed almost disappointed, like I was ruining the dramatic scene he'd choreographed. Just like that. I walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at him. At this man I had given 28 years to. At this man who had slowly, systematically destroyed my self-esteem, while I quietly accumulated every asset he thought was his. Goodbye, Victor, I said. I hope you and Brittany are very happy together. And I walked out. I didn't take anything with me except my purse. I didn't need to. Everything that mattered, the documents, the account numbers, the contacts for our lawyers and financial advisors, was already in my possession, had been for years. I got in my car and drove to the Four Seasons downtown. I checked into their nicest suite, ordered room service, and took a long bath. And then I picked up my phone and made a call. Robert, I said when my attorney answered, it's Caroline Ashford. I need you to execute the contingency plan. Yes, all of it, effective immediately. I hung up and poured myself a glass of wine. For the first time in 28 years, I felt something other than stress and disappointment and shame. I felt free. The next 24 hours were going to be very interesting for Victor. He had no idea what was coming. No idea that while he was celebrating with his young mistress in what he thought was his house, the legal wheels were already turning. Tomorrow, he would learn the truth. Tomorrow, he would discover that the whale he had discarded was actually the one who owned everything. But tonight, I was going to enjoy my wine, my solitude, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had finally stopped being a victim. The best revenge, they say, is living well. I was about to live very well indeed. The morning after I left, I woke up in 1,500 thread count sheets and felt a peace I hadn't experienced in decades. For 28 years, I had started every day with a knot in my stomach. What would Victor say today? What would he criticize? Would this be a good day when he ignored me? Or a bad day when he found new ways to make me feel worthless? But that morning, in my suite at the Four Seasons, I woke up to silence. Beautiful, perfect silence. No one was going to comment on what I ate for breakfast. No one was going to sigh at my outfit or roll their eyes at my existence. I was alone, and for the first time in my adult life, being alone felt like freedom rather than failure. I ordered room service, a full breakfast with eggs and bacon and pancakes, the kind of indulgent meal Victor would have raised his eyebrows at, and ate every bite while watching the morning news. Then I took a long shower, put on the most comfortable clothes I'd packed, and sat down to wait. Robert had assured me everything would be in motion by noon. The sheriff's office would serve the papers. The bank accounts would be frozen. The locks on the house would be changed. By the end of the day, Victor would understand just how thoroughly he had been outmaneuvered. I tried to feel guilty about what I was doing. After all, we had been married for 28 years. We had raised 2 children together. There had been good times, especially in the beginning, before the weight gain and the criticism and the slow erosion of everything I thought we had. But every time I started to feel bad, I remembered his words. Pack your bags. I need a woman who fits into designer clothes, not a whale. A whale. That's what 28 years of marriage had amounted to. 28 years of supporting his career, managing his household, raising his children, and tolerating his abuse. And in the end, I was nothing to him but a whale that needed to be discarded for a newer, thinner model. I didn't feel guilty. I felt righteous. While I waited for the day to unfold, I thought about how we had gotten here. Not just to this hotel room, but to the place where my husband felt comfortable bringing his mistress into our home and throwing me out like garbage. The escalation had been so gradual that I almost hadn't noticed it happening. Like the proverbial frog in boiling water, I had adjusted to each new level of cruelty until what would have been unthinkable in year 1 felt almost normal in year 28. In the early years, Victor's comments were couched in concern. Honey, are you feeling okay? You look a little puffy. I just want you to be healthy. You know heart disease runs in your family. I read an article about this new diet that's supposed to work miracles. Want me to send it to you? I believed him then. I believed he was worried about me, that his concern came from love. I didn't recognize it for what it was. The first steps in a campaign to make me feel like I was never quite good enough. By our 10th anniversary, the concern had given way to disappointment. He would look at old photos of me and sigh. He would decline to take pictures with me at events. He would introduce me to colleagues with a tone that suggested apology, as if my appearance was something he had to explain or excuse. She used to be much thinner. I once overheard him tell a business partner. Hasn't been the same since the kids. I spent that night crying in the bathroom while Victor slept peacefully in our bed. The next morning, I joined another gym. I hired another trainer. I started another diet that would work for a few months before the stress of maintaining it became too much and I gained back everything I'd lost, plus more. By our 20th anniversary, the disappointment had transformed into open contempt. Victor no longer bothered to hide his disgust. He criticized my clothes, my hair, my eating habits. He stopped touching me except when absolutely necessary for public appearances. He started sleeping in the guest room claiming I snored, though I suspect the real reason was that he couldn't stand to be near me. Our children noticed. Of course they noticed. Our son Michael, who was in college by then, started making excuses not to come home for holidays. Our daughter Emma, still in high school, would sit at the dinner table in rigid silence while her father made cutting remarks, and her mother pretended not to hear them. "Why do you let him talk to you that way?" Emma asked me once when we were alone in the kitchen. I didn't have a good answer. "Marriage is complicated," I said, which was the biggest cop-out in the world. "Your father loves me. He's just stressed." Emma had looked at me with something like pity in her young eyes. "That's not love, Mom," she said. "That's cruelty." She was right, of course. My 18-year-old daughter had understood something I had spent 2 decades trying to deny. Victor didn't love me. Maybe he never had. Maybe I had just been a prop in the life he wanted to build. A pretty young wife who would make him look successful, who would manage his home and raise his children and stay thin enough not to embarrass him. When I failed at that last requirement, I became worthless to him. The final escalation happened slowly, then all at once. Over the past few years, Victor had become increasingly distant. Business trips that lasted longer than necessary. Late nights at the office that I suspected weren't actually spent working. A new energy in his step, a new attention to his appearance, a new password on his phone. I knew he was having an affair long before I caught him with Brittany. I had found receipts for jewelry I never received. I had noticed charges at restaurants I never visited. I had seen the way he smiled at his phone sometimes, that secret smile that used to be reserved for me. I could have confronted him then. I could have demanded answers, insisted on counseling, made an ultimatum. But by that point, I was so worn down, so convinced of my own worthlessness, that I couldn't summon the energy to fight. And besides, I had my plan, my escape hatch, the years of quiet preparation that Victor knew nothing about. Every time he made me feel small, I reminded myself of the documents in the safe deposit box. Every time he criticized my weight, I reviewed the account statements that showed our wealth growing under my careful management. Every time he treated me like I was nothing, I thought about the day I would prove just how wrong he was. That day had finally arrived. At 11:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Papers served. Sheriff reported subject was surprised." I smiled and poured myself another cup of coffee. At 12:15, Robert called with an update. "It's done. The bank accounts are frozen, pending the divorce proceedings. The house locks have been changed. The locksmith finished about 20 minutes ago, and I've confirmed that all the properties in the trust are legally and irrevocably yours." How did he react? According to the sheriff, Mr. Ashford became quite agitated. There was apparently a young woman present who left in a hurry once she understood the situation. Brittany, I believe so. She departed shortly after the sheriff began explaining that Mr. Ashford had no legal claim to the residence. I felt a petty satisfaction at that. Brittany, who had looked at me with such superiority yesterday, had discovered that her wealthy older boyfriend wasn't so wealthy after all. I wondered how quickly she would find a new sugar daddy. What happens now? I asked. Now we wait. Ashford will undoubtedly contact his own attorney, who will review the trust documents and the property records. They'll discover that everything is in order. You've been the legal owner of all marital assets for years. He signed away any claim to them when he executed the trust paperwork. He didn't read it. I'm aware. That's his problem, not yours. Robert's tone was professionally neutral, but I detected a hint of satisfaction. He had never liked Victor. The divorce should be straightforward. Given the circumstances, his infidelity, his verbal abuse, and the existing asset distribution, I don't anticipate any complications. Thank you, Robert, for everything. Thank you, Caroline. It's been a pleasure watching you take control of your life. After we hung up, I sat by the window and watched the city below. Somewhere out there, Victor was learning that the wife he had discarded was actually the one who held all the cards. The house he loved to show off, hers. The cars he drove with such pride, hers. The country club membership he used to network with important people, hers. Everything he thought defined his success, everything he used to feel superior to me, all of it had belonged to me for years. He just never bothered to notice. My phone started buzzing around 1 p.m. Victor, calling over and over, each call going to voicemail. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to talk to him yet. I wanted him to sit with this, to feel the full weight of what he had lost. The texts started shortly after. Caroline, what the hell is going on? Call me immediately. This is some kind of mistake. We need to talk. Caroline, I'm serious. Call me back. The sheriff says I have to leave my house. This is insane. Caroline, please. Whatever this is, we can work it out. Call me. I read each message with detached interest, like I was observing a stranger's meltdown. This was the man who had told me to pack my bags and leave. The man who had called me a whale in front of his mistress. The man who had made me feel worthless for 28 years. Now he was begging me to call him back. I turned off my phone and went to the hotel spa. I had a massage scheduled for 2 p.m., a facial at 3:30, and a manicure at 5. By the time I was done being pampered, Victor would have had plenty of time to understand just how badly he had miscalculated. The spa was quiet and peaceful, all soft music and eucalyptus scents. As the masseuse worked on the knots in my shoulders, years of tension accumulated from living with Victor, I thought about what came next. The divorce would be quick, thanks to the trust structure. Victor had no legal grounds to contest the asset distribution. He had signed away any claim years ago. His attorney would review the documents, realize there was nothing to fight over, and advise him to accept whatever settlement I offered. I planned to be generous, actually. Not because Victor deserved it, but because I didn't want to be the kind of person who took petty revenge. I would give him enough to rent a decent apartment, enough to maintain some dignity. I wasn't trying to destroy him. I just wanted to be free of him. And I was. For the first time in 28 years, I was truly, completely free. The weight I had carried for so long, not just the physical weight, but the emotional weight, the weight of Victor's expectations and disappointments and cruelty, had finally lifted. I could breathe. I could exist without apologizing for my existence. I could be exactly who I was without someone constantly telling me I should be someone else. That evening, after my spa treatments, I had dinner in the hotel restaurant. I ordered a steak and a glass of wine and chocolate cake for dessert. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, not worrying about anyone's judgment but my own. At the next table, a young couple was celebrating something, an anniversary, maybe, or an engagement. They looked at each other with such tenderness, such genuine affection. I remembered when Victor and I had looked at each other like that. I wondered when we had stopped. Maybe we never really had. Maybe I had just been too young and too hopeful to see him clearly. Maybe the man who had called me a whale yesterday was the same man who had married me 28 years ago. I just hadn't known him well enough to recognize it. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I had finally stopped waiting for him to change. Stopped hoping that if I just lost enough weight, was just pretty enough, was just perfect enough, he would love me again. He was never going to love me. Not really. Not the way I deserved to be loved. But I could love myself. I could finally, after all these years, start being kind to myself. I finished my chocolate cake and signed the check to my room. Tomorrow, I would turn my phone back on. Tomorrow, I would face Victor and whatever rage or manipulation he had prepared. Tomorrow, I would start the legal process of ending my marriage. But tonight, I was going to sleep peacefully for the second night in a row. And that alone was worth everything. I need to tell you about the 24 hours between when I left and when the sheriff arrived. Not from my perspective. You already know what I was doing, ordering room service and spa treatments and finally allowing myself to breathe. I need to tell you about Victor. I pieced this together later, from conversations with our children, from the sheriff's report, from Victor's own drunken confessions during our divorce proceedings. It's a story about a man who thought he had everything, only to discover he had nothing. Let me paint the picture. After I walked out that Tuesday afternoon, Victor stood in the living room of what he believed was his house, feeling triumphant. He had done it. After years of being trapped in a marriage with a woman who had let herself go, who embarrassed him at social functions, who was a constant reminder of how far his life had strayed from his expectations, he had finally taken action. Brittany was there, of course, looking at him with admiration. She thought he was powerful. She thought he was successful. She thought he was a man who knew what he wanted and went after it. "I can't believe she just left," Brittany said. "I thought there would be, I don't know, crying? Screaming?" Caroline doesn't have the energy for screaming. Victor poured himself a scotch from the bar, my bar technically, but he didn't know that. She gave up years ago. I'm surprised she lasted this long. Poor thing. Brittany's sympathy was paper thin. So what happens now? Now? Victor grinned. Now we celebrate. The old ball and chain is gone. We have the whole place to ourselves. They ordered expensive takeout. They opened bottles of wine from the cellar, my cellar. They lounged on the furniture and made plans for the future. Victor talked about renovating the house, about traveling to Europe, about all the things he could finally do now that he wasn't weighed down by his disappointing wife. "I'm thinking we redecorate the whole place," he said. "Get rid of all this old stuff. Caroline's taste was always so boring." "I love modern design," Brittany agreed. "All clean lines and white spaces." "Exactly. Out with the old, in with the new." He pulled her close. "That includes wives." They laughed. They toasted to their future. They had sex in the master bedroom, my bedroom, and fell asleep in sheets that I had chosen, in a bed that I had paid for, surrounded by a life that Victor believed belonged to him. He had no idea what was coming. The sheriff arrived at 11:30 the next morning. Victor answered the door in a bathrobe, annoyed at being disturbed. He assumed it was a package delivery or perhaps some kind of mistake. What he found instead was 2 uniformed officers and a stack of legal documents. "Victor Ashford?" the sheriff asked. "Yes?" "Sir, I'm here to inform you that you are no longer permitted on this property. These papers explain the situation in detail." Victor blinked. "What? That's ridiculous. This is my house." "According to these documents, sir, the house belongs to Caroline Ashford. It's held in a family trust that was established." The sheriff consulted his papers. "Approximately 12 years ago. You are named as a beneficiary but have no ownership rights." "That's impossible. I never—" Victor's face went pale. "There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake, sir. The property records are clear. Ashford is the sole owner of this property. She's requested that you vacate the premises immediately." Brittany had emerged from the bedroom by this point, wrapped in a sheet, her perfect hair mussed from sleep. "Victor? What's going on?" The sheriff glanced at her, then back at Victor. "You'll need to gather your personal belongings and leave within the hour. A locksmith will be arriving to change the locks at noon." "You can't do this." Victor's voice was rising. "This is my house. I paid for this house. I built my career from this house." "Sir, I understand you're upset, but the documentation is clear. If you have concerns about the legality of these proceedings, I suggest you contact an attorney. In the meantime, you need to vacate." What followed, according to the sheriff's report, was a 30-minute confrontation during which Victor cycled through denial, anger, bargaining, and back to denial. He demanded to see the documents. He demanded to call his lawyer. He demanded that the sheriff admit this was some kind of prank. The documents were real. His lawyer, when finally reached, confirmed that he needed to review the situation, but that Victor should comply with the sheriff's instructions in the meantime. And it was definitely not a prank. Meanwhile, Brittany was asking questions that revealed the true nature of her interest in Victor. Wait, so the house isn't yours? What about the cars, the country club, the investments? Victor, still reeling, admitted he didn't know. You don't know? How do you not know what you own? Caroline handled all of that. She likes that stuff. It was all supposed to be. The look on Brittany's face shifted from confusion to calculation. She excused herself to use the bathroom. 5 minutes later, Victor heard her car starting in the driveway. She left without saying goodbye. By noon, Victor was standing on the front lawn of what he had believed was his house, holding a single suitcase of clothing, watching a locksmith change the locks. The neighbors were watching from their windows. The mailman paused at the end of the driveway, clearly enjoying the show. Victor had never felt so humiliated in his life. He got in his car, my car actually, though he didn't know that yet, and drove to a hotel. Not the Four Seasons where I was staying, but a Holiday Inn on the outskirts of town. He couldn't afford the Four Seasons on his own, he realized with dawning horror. His salary was direct deposited into a joint account that Caroline controlled. He spent the afternoon calling everyone he could think of. His lawyer, who needed time to review the trust documents. His business partner, who was shocked and unhelpful. His mother, who had died 3 years ago but whom Victor still reached for in moments of crisis. And Caroline. Over and over he called Caroline. She didn't answer. Her phone went straight to voicemail every time. He left messages that ranged from furious to pleading to threatening, and still she didn't respond. That evening, alone in a hotel room that smelled like industrial cleaner, Victor finally began to understand his situation. The house was Caroline's. Had been for 12 years. Ever since she'd established that trust and he'd signed the papers without reading them. Just tax stuff, she'd said. And he'd scrawled his signature and gone back to his important work. The cars were Caroline's too, all of them registered to the trust. His beautiful German sedan, his weekend sports car, even the SUV they used for family trips, none of them were his. The country club membership, the investment accounts, the vacation property in Florida, all of it, legally and irrevocably, belonged to his wife. The wife he had called a whale, the wife he had thrown out of her own house to make room for his mistress, the wife he had spent 28 years diminishing and dismissing and treating like she was nothing. It turned out she was everything. He just hadn't bothered to notice. Victor cried that night, not from sadness exactly, but from shock. His entire understanding of his life had been upended. The success he'd prided himself on, the wealth he'd accumulated, the status he'd achieved, it had all been an illusion, a castle built on sand that his wife had owned all along. He kept asking himself, how did I not know? But the answer was obvious, wasn't it? He hadn't known because he hadn't cared. Caroline handled the boring stuff, the bills and the accounts and the paperwork, and he hadn't bothered to pay attention. He had been too busy with his career, his social life, his extramarital affairs, too busy being important to notice that his wife was quietly, systematically taking control of everything. Had she planned this? Had she spent years preparing for this moment, knowing that one day he would push her too far? Or had she simply been protecting herself, building an escape hatch that she hoped she would never need? Victor didn't know. And for the first time, he realized that he didn't know his wife at all. The woman he had dismissed as weak and passive and worthless had outmaneuvered him completely. The whale had swallowed him whole. The next morning, Victor woke to a text from his lawyer. I've reviewed the documents. The trust is ironclad. There's no legal basis to contest it. We need to talk about damage control. Damage control. That's what his marriage had become. Not something to save, but something to survive. Victor drove to his lawyer's office in a car that no longer belonged to him, wearing clothes from a closet that was now someone else's property, carrying a wallet full of credit cards that might be canceled at any moment. He had never felt so powerless in his life, and somewhere across town, in a luxurious hotel suite, his wife was having breakfast in bed, finally free after 28 years. The bottom, they say, is where you finally stop digging. For Victor, the bottom was a Holiday Inn and a lawyer delivering bad news. For me, the bottom had been years earlier. That moment when I realized I couldn't keep living like this, couldn't keep letting him destroy me one cruel comment at a time. We had both hit bottom. The difference was that I had used it as a launching pad. Victor was still falling. 3 days after I left, I finally agreed to see Victor. Not because I wanted to, I was perfectly happy never seeing him again. But Robert said it would be better for the divorce proceedings if we had at least one face-to-face conversation, and I had reached a point where I could face him without trembling. We met at a coffee shop near his hotel. I chose the location deliberately, a public place where he couldn't make a scene, far from the expensive restaurants where we used to be seen as a power couple. A place that said, "We are equals now. No, actually, I have the power. Get used to it." I arrived early and ordered a latte. I was wearing a new outfit. Not designer, just clothes that fit well and made me feel confident. I had gotten my hair done the day before. I looked, if I may say so, pretty good. Not thin. I would never be thin again, and I had finally stopped caring. But healthy. Strong. Like a woman who had survived something and come out the other side. Victor arrived exactly on time. He looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed. His usually impeccable suit was wrinkled. He had the look of a man who had been sleeping badly and thinking too much. Good. Caroline. He stood by the table, uncertain. The Victor I had known would have sat down without asking, would have assumed his welcome anywhere he went. This Victor waited for permission. "Sit down, Victor." He sat. He ordered a black coffee, his voice hoarse. He didn't look at me directly. "So," he said finally, "you destroyed me. I protected myself by taking everything I worked for, everything we worked for, and I didn't take it. It was always mine. You just never bothered to notice." He flinched. "I trusted you." "No, you didn't. You ignored me. There's a difference." I sipped my latte, taking my time. "You trusted me to handle the boring details while you did the important things. You signed whatever I put in front of you because you couldn't be bothered to read it. You assumed I would never do anything without your approval because you thought I was too weak and stupid to act on my own. I never thought you were stupid. You thought I was worthless. You told me so 100 different ways every single day. You told me with every look, every sigh, every cruel comment about my weight." I set down my cup. "You told me when you brought your mistress into my house and called me a whale." Victor's jaw tightened. I was angry. "I didn't mean, yes, you did. You meant every word." "That's the thing, Victor. You've spent 28 years meaning every word. Every criticism, every disappointment, every time you made me feel like I was ruining your life just by existing, you meant all of it. So this is revenge? This is survival." I looked at him steadily. "I didn't plan to destroy you. I planned to protect myself. The trust, the accounts, the property. I set all of that up because I knew, deep down, that one day I would need to escape. I hoped I wouldn't. I hoped that somehow you would change. Or I would change. Or things would get better. But I knew they wouldn't. If you were so unhappy, why didn't you just leave?" It was such a stupid question, but I answered it anyway. "Because I believed what you told me. I believed I was worthless. I believed I couldn't survive on my own. I believed that I was the problem, that if I just tried harder, lost more weight, was more perfect, you would love me again." I shook my head. "It took me years to understand that you were never going to love me. You don't know how to love. You only know how to possess." Victor was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, more like the man I had married 30 years ago. "I did love you, Caroline, in the beginning. Maybe. Or maybe you loved what I represented, the pretty young wife who made you look successful. Either way, it doesn't matter now. What do you want? From the divorce, I mean. What are your terms?" I had thought about this carefully. I could destroy him completely, leave him with nothing, force him to start over from zero. It would be satisfying in a petty way, a final revenge for all the years of cruelty. But that wasn't who I wanted to be. I want the divorce to be final within 60 days. I want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You don't talk about our marriage or our finances to anyone. And I want you to leave me alone afterward. No calls, no emails, no running into each other at social events. That's it? You don't want to take everything? I already have everything. What would taking more accomplish? He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Who are you? I'm the woman you were married to for 28 years. The woman who managed your household, raised your children, and built your wealth while you criticized her for not being pretty enough. I stood up. I'm the whale who swallowed you whole, Victor. And now I'm letting you go. I left money on the table for both our drinks. I didn't look back as I walked out. The turning point isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a conversation in a coffee shop. A moment when you realize that the person who once had all the power over you now has none. Sometimes it's looking at someone who made you feel small and realizing that they're the small one. They always were. Victor didn't fight the divorce. His lawyer advised against it, given the ironclad nature of the trust, and Victor himself seemed too stunned to muster any resistance. He signed the papers Robert sent over, agreed to the non-disclosure terms, and accepted a settlement that would allow him to rent an apartment and maintain a basic standard of living. It was more than he deserved, but less than he had expected. He would have to work for the first time in decades. Actually work, not just schmooze and delegate. He would have to rebuild from scratch. I found myself hoping he would learn something from the experience, not for his sake, but for whoever he dated next. Maybe losing everything would teach him humility. Maybe being powerless would make him more compassionate. Or maybe he would just find another wealthy woman to marry and start the cycle all over again. I couldn't control that. I could only control my own choices. The weeks after the coffee shop meeting were some of the strangest of my life. I had spent so long being Victor's wife, managing his household, anticipating his moods, organizing my entire existence around his preferences, that I didn't know who I was without him. I started with small things. I redecorated the house, getting rid of all the furniture Victor had chosen and replacing it with pieces I actually liked. I painted the walls colors he would have vetoed. I bought art that appealed to me, not art that impressed visitors. I started cooking again. Really cooking, not just preparing meals that Victor would approve of. I made dishes my mother used to make, heavy with butter and cream and love. I baked bread. I experimented with recipes I had always wanted to try. I ate what I wanted, when I wanted, without anyone watching or judging. I joined a gym, but not to lose weight. I joined because I wanted to feel strong, to rebuild the physical confidence that years of criticism had eroded. I worked with a trainer who never once mentioned my size, who only asked what I wanted to accomplish and helped me accomplish it. I started therapy. Finally, after all those years, I talked to a professional about what I had experienced. Not all of it, not at first. It took months to unpack the layers of manipulation and abuse and self-blame. But each session peeled back another layer, helped me understand how I had ended up in a marriage that had slowly tried to kill everything good in me. "You survived," my therapist said once. "Do you understand how remarkable that is? 28 years of emotional abuse, and you not only survived, you thrived. You built an escape plan and you executed it. That takes incredible strength." I cried in that session. I cried because I had never thought of myself as strong. I had always thought of myself as weak. Too weak to leave. Too weak to stand up for myself. Too weak to be anything other than what Victor wanted me to be. But I wasn't weak. I had never been weak. I had been trapped, yes. Worn down, certainly. But underneath all of that, I had been quietly, methodically preparing my freedom. That wasn't weakness. That was survival. The turning point wasn't just about Victor losing his power over me. It was about me recognizing my own power. The power I had always had. The power I had used to protect myself even when I didn't consciously realize I was doing it. I was Caroline Ashford. I was 52 years old. I was overweight and divorced and starting my life over from scratch. And for the first time in decades, I was exactly who I wanted to be. The rain started around midnight. I was reading in bed, a novel, something light and enjoyable, the kind of book Victor would have dismissed as mindless, when I heard the thunder. Within minutes, it had become a full storm, rain lashing against the windows, lightning illuminating the sky. I had always loved storms. There was something cleansing about them, the way they washed everything clean and left the world fresh and renewed. I set down my book and went to the window to watch. That's when I saw the car in my driveway. Even in the darkness, even through the sheets of rain, I recognized it. A Honda Civic, silver, unremarkable. The kind of car Victor would never have been caught dead in 6 months ago. Now, apparently, it was what he could afford. He was sitting inside, not moving, just parked there in the storm, watching my house. I should have called the police. The restraining order I had considered getting would have made this easier. But something stopped me. Maybe curiosity, maybe the desire for one final confrontation. I watched him watching me, and I waited. After 20 minutes, he got out of the car. The rain soaked him instantly. He stood in my driveway, looking up at the house that used to be his, and I saw something in his posture that I had never seen before. Defeat. Complete and utter defeat. My phone rang. Victor's name on the screen. I answered. "It's midnight, Victor. I know. I'm sorry. His voice broke. "Can I come in? Please? Just to talk? We have nothing to talk about. Please, Caroline. I know I don't deserve it. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But please, just give me 5 minutes." I looked at him through the window, standing in the rain, begging for 5 minutes of my time. 6 months ago, he had thrown me out of my own house without a second thought. Now he couldn't even get inside without my permission. There was a certain poetic justice to it, a certain completion. "Stay there," I said. "I'll come to the door." I went downstairs and opened the front door. Victor was waiting at the bottom of the porch steps, rain streaming down his face. He looked thinner than I had ever seen him, older, like he had aged a decade in 6 months. "You can come onto the porch," I said, "but you're not coming inside." He climbed the steps and stood under the overhang, water dripping from his clothes. He was shivering. I didn't offer him a towel. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for talking to me. Say what you came to say, Victor." He was quiet for a moment, collecting himself. When he spoke, his voice was raw. "I've been thinking, a lot, about us, about what happened, about everything I did wrong." He looked at me, and his eyes were wet. From rain or tears, I couldn't tell. "I was terrible to you, Caroline. For years I was terrible. I know that now. I think I always knew. But I told myself it was okay because you never fought back. I told myself you didn't really mind, that you understood, that you knew I didn't mean it. I did fight back. You just didn't notice. I know. The trust, the accounts, all of it." He shook his head. "God, I was so blind. I was so busy criticizing you that I never saw what you were actually doing. You were outmaneuvering me at every turn, and I was too arrogant to see it. Is that what this is about? You're angry that I outsmarted you? He struggled for words. "I'm grateful that you didn't destroy me completely, that you left me with enough to start over. You didn't have to do that. After everything I did to you, you would have been justified in leaving me with nothing. I hadn't expected gratitude. It caught me off guard. I'm not a cruel person," I said finally. "Unlike you. I know. That's what I keep thinking about. I was so cruel to you for so long, and you didn't become cruel in return. You just protected yourself and moved on." He met my eyes. "You're a better person than I ever was. That's not saying much." "No." He almost smiled. "I suppose it isn't." We stood in silence for a moment. The rain continued to fall, gentler now. The worst of the storm had passed. "What do you want, Victor?" "Really? What are you doing here in the middle of the night?" He took a breath. "I want to apologize. Really apologize, not just say the words. I want you to know that I understand what I did. The constant criticism, the comments about your weight, the way I made you feel worthless." His voice cracked. "You weren't worthless. You were never worthless. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I spent 28 years trying to destroy you." I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness. It was too soon for forgiveness. Might always be too soon. But something loosened. Some knot that I had been carrying for decades. "Why did you do it?" I asked. "Why did you treat me that way?" "Because I was scared." He said it like a confession. like something he had only recently admitted to himself. When you gained weight, I was scared that you were changing into someone I didn't know. I thought if I criticized you enough, you would go back to being the woman I married. But you didn't. You just became sadder, and instead of realizing that I was the problem, I blamed you more. That's not love. It was control. Fear disguised as control. He wiped his face. Rain or tears. Still impossible to tell. I was afraid of losing you, so I tried to control you. And in the end, I lost you anyway. I lost everything. Yes, you did. I know this doesn't change anything. I know I can't undo what I did, but I needed you to hear me say it. I needed you to know that I finally understand. I looked at him. This man I had married. This man I had built a life with. This man who had systematically destroyed my self-esteem for nearly 3 decades. He was pathetic now, standing soaking wet on my porch, begging for absolution. And I realized that I didn't hate him anymore. Not love. That was long dead if it had ever truly existed. But the hatred I had carried, the resentment that had fueled my quiet rebellion for years, it was fading. Looking at him now, all I felt was a kind of distant pity. I hear you, I said. And I appreciate you saying it, but this doesn't change anything between us. We're done, Victor. We've been done for a long time. I know. I'm not asking for another chance. I'm just asking... He paused, struggling. I'm asking you to forgive me. Eventually. Not now, maybe not for years, but someday. Forgiveness. The hardest thing to give and the most necessary. I don't know if I can do that, I said honestly. But I'm going to try. Not for you. For me. Carrying this anger is exhausting. I don't want to spend the rest of my life being angry at you. That's more than I deserve. Yes, it is. I stepped back toward the door. Goodbye, Victor. I hope you find whatever you're looking for. Goodbye, Caroline. He turned to go, then stopped. For what it's worth, you look beautiful. You always did. I was just too blind to see it. I watched him walk back to his car, get in, and drive away. The taillights disappeared into the rain, and he was gone. I stood on the porch for a long time after that, thinking about everything that had happened. The marriage, the abuse, the escape, the divorce. The long journey from being Victor's victim to being Caroline's own person. It wasn't a happy ending, exactly. Too much damage had been done for that. But it was an ending. A real ending. Not just a legal separation, but an emotional one. Victor was finally, truly, out of my life. I went back inside, dried off, and made myself a cup of tea. The storm had passed. Tomorrow would be a new day. And for the first time, I was looking forward to it. It's been 2 years since that night on the porch. I'm writing this from a cafe in Paris, of all places. I always wanted to travel, but Victor thought it was a waste of money. Why leave the country when everything worth seeing was in America? So we never went anywhere except business trips and the occasional beach vacation where he would complain about my swimsuit. Now I go wherever I want. Paris in the spring, Tokyo in the summer, a small village in Tuscany where I spent 3 weeks learning to make pasta from a grandmother who didn't speak a word of English. The world turned out to be bigger and more beautiful than I ever imagined. I've changed in other ways too. Not my weight. I'm still what polite society calls plus-sized, and what Victor would have called fat. But I've stopped seeing my body as the enemy. It carries me through the world. It lets me walk the streets of Paris and climb the steps of cathedrals and dance at midnight in jazz clubs. It's a good body. It's my body. And I've finally learned to love it. The therapy helped. 2 years of weekly sessions, unpacking the decades of damage that Victor inflicted. Some days were hard. There were things I had buried so deep that bringing them to the surface felt like drowning. But each session made me a little stronger, a little more able to see myself clearly. "You've done remarkable work," my therapist said at our last session before I left for Paris. "You should be proud of yourself." I am proud, not of being Victor's victim, that was never something to be proud of, but of surviving it, of building a life on the other side. My children are part of that life now. Michael and Emma had their own complicated feelings about the divorce. They loved their father, despite everything, and watching him fall apart was painful for them. But they also knew what he had done to me. Emma told me once that she had been waiting for me to leave since she was 16 years old. "I used to pray that you would finally stand up to him," she said. "And when you didn't, I thought maybe you were too weak." "But you weren't weak, Mom. You were just waiting for the right moment." "I was scared," I admitted. "For a long time, I was just scared." "But you did it anyway. That's what courage is." My daughter, teaching me about courage. I must have done something right. I'm dating again, though dating feels like too serious a word for it. His name is James. He's a widower, a retired professor, and he treats me like I'm the most fascinating person he's ever met. He doesn't comment on my weight. He doesn't criticize my choices. He just loves me, simply, unconditionally, the way I always wanted to be loved. We met at a cooking class, of all things. I was learning to make soufflé. He was there because his late wife had loved to cook, and he wanted to feel close to her memory. We bonded over our failed first attempts and our successful second ones, and he asked me to dinner. "I should warn you," I said. "I'm divorced. My marriage was bad. I might have some issues." "I should warn you," he replied. "I'm a widower. I'll probably talk about my wife too much, and I have issues of my own." "Then we'll have issues together," I said. And we do. It's not perfect. No relationship is, but it's healthy. It's kind. It's everything my marriage with Victor wasn't. Speaking of Victor, I heard through the grapevine that he's doing better. He got a job as a consultant, apparently. He's living in a condo somewhere, dating a woman his own age. Emma says he seems humbled, softer, like the experience of losing everything taught him something. I hope it did. I hope he learned to treat people better, to see value in others beyond their appearance, to be kind instead of cruel. I hope whoever he's with now doesn't experience what I experienced. But it's not my concern anymore. Victor is part of my past, not my future. I wish him well, in an abstract sort of way, but I don't spend my days thinking about him. He doesn't deserve that much of my mental real estate. My mental real estate is occupied with other things now, with travel and cooking and my children and James, with books I've always wanted to read and places I've always wanted to see, with the simple pleasure of waking up each morning and not dreading the day ahead. Liberation, I've learned, isn't a single moment. It's not the day you walk out or the day the divorce is finalized or the day your abuser finally apologizes. Liberation is a process. It's choosing yourself over and over again, every single day. It's learning to trust your own judgment after years of being told you couldn't trust yourself. It's rebuilding, brick by brick, the self-esteem that someone else spent decades tearing down. I'm still rebuilding. I probably always will be. But each day, I get a little stronger. Each day, I believe a little more in my own worth. Victor called me a whale once. He meant it as an insult, as the cruelest thing he could think of to call me. But whales are magnificent creatures. They're strong and graceful, and they navigate the entire ocean. They survive in conditions that would kill most other animals. Maybe being a whale isn't such a bad thing after all. The cafe is getting busy now. The morning crowd is filtering in. Parisians grabbing espresso before work. Tourists studying maps. I should probably pay my bill and continue my day. There's a museum I want to visit, and a walk along the Seine. And tonight, James and I are going to try that little bistro he read about in a guidebook. But I want to finish this first. I want to put it all down in writing, so I don't forget how far I've come. 3 years ago, I was standing in my living room watching my husband kiss another woman. I was being called a whale, being thrown out of my own home, being discarded like garbage after 28 years of marriage. Today, I'm sitting in a Parisian cafe, drinking excellent coffee, wearing clothes I chose because I like them, thinking about the day ahead and finding only good things to anticipate. I did that. I built that. Not Victor, not anyone else. Me. And that, in the end, is what liberation means. Not the absence of pain or the presence of revenge, just the simple, profound freedom of being yourself, of taking up space in the world without apology, of knowing your own worth, regardless of what anyone else might say. I am Caroline Ashford. I am 54 years old. I am overweight and divorced and happier than I have ever been in my life, and I wouldn't trade any of it for anything. The bill comes. I pay it with a smile, and I walk out into the Paris sunshine, ready for whatever comes next. Because that's what survivors do. We keep walking. We keep living. We keep proving every single day that we are so much more than the worst things that happen to us. I am more than Victor's cruelty. I am more than 28 years of abuse. I am more than the whale he tried to make me believe I was. I am free, and freedom, it turns out, is the most beautiful thing in the world.